This video was brought to you in part by the supporters of the AMTV Patreon. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Ident Review Extra, the spin-off show that takes a look at one individual ident each episode and gives it the review it deserves. And this time around, we're embarking on a journey through the ITV Network, and all the different regional stations that comprised it. We're sticking around in Scotland to look at the occasionally overlooked Grampian television. Following the launch of Scottish television in 1957, viewers in the northern part of Scotland were finally given a station of their own to tune into a few years later in 1961. On the 30th of September that year, Grampian Television, or simply Grampian, began transmitting as part of the ITV Network. Its early few years were somewhat turbulent, as viewers in key areas such as Dundee took time to be swayed away from the competing offerings on STV. However, by the late 60s, Grampian had amassed a core audience within the northern Scottish area. In terms of its idents, like many different regions across the ITV network, Grampian would adopt a key symbol to become the core of their logo throughout the years. In this case, it would be a version of the Scottish flag, the saltire. Right from its inception in the early 60s, up until the retirement of the Grampian name in the mid-2000s, the saltire element remained an almost constant fixture. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the idents used by Grampian from throughout its long and distinguished history.
Meanwhile, here on Grampian, time to get a little festive with tonight's movie premiere, Jingle All the Way.
See what I mean about one recurring symbol? The saltire is a constant for Grampian, even from the very first ident, for which we see here in monochrome. I love the idea of the mountain range flipping around to eventually become the familiar Grampian logo. Obviously, being in black and white, we don't get treated to the lovely blue tones that make up the Scottish flag, but even in monochrome, it succeeds in creating an instantly memorable identity, all with the accompaniment of Scotland the Brave, a fitting choice to say the least. With the advent of colour, which Grampian began to utilise in its 10th year, in 1971, it was time for the ident to evolve. We see the four triangles come together in the centre, all caked in glorious different colours, to really smash in the idea that colour was well and truly here at Grampian. Many other ITV stations also would employ similar tactics to highlight colour, so no surprise that we see it here. The triangles eventually expand again, now with the iconic blue and white tones of the Scottish flag, for which audiences could now finally enjoy in full colour. The colour text that accompanies Grampian this time around, again, was a very common feature for many TV channels in their first few years of running full-time colour services. This sequence would last until the mid-1980s, when Grampian would once again move with the times. 1985 was a huge year for TV idents here in the UK. After Channel 4 debuted its iconic computer-generated look in 1982, other TV companies scrambled to follow suit. 1985 saw channels like BBC One and many of the ITV regions follow this formula. Grampian's CG ident, like many of the era, seemed relatively primitive by today's standards, but was at the forefront of available technology back in 1985. The spheres and blocks fly around before once again forming the Scottish flag, creating the main focal point of the Grampian logo. If there's one thing this station does well, it's that it always seemed to find a way to maintain the centre point of its identity, that being the saltire, whilst also embracing new technology, being able to show it off to the best of its ability. Despite the success with early CG, only a few years later, in 1989, ITV would debut a generic logo that would be encouraged to be taken up by all franchise holders. Most regions did adapt the generic ITV logo, Grampian being one of the longest users of the sequence. From 1989 to 1998, it would be the primary ident seen by Scottish viewers tuning into Grampian. However, when ITV introduced a second generic logo, Grampian, together with its neighbouring Scottish television, rejected its implementation. They changed their logos, maintaining their own sense of independent identity, but without using the ITV display. Sadly, like STV, the results are a bit lackluster, and would remain dull in terms of visuals all the way up until 2006. For it was this year that Grampian was to be bought out, and folded into Scottish television, with now all areas in Scotland covered by STV, thus ending Grampian's 45-year run on the ITV airwaves. For Scottish viewers of a certain age, when you mention ITV, two channels are going to spring to mind, either STV or Grampian. And whilst Grampian may have covered a smaller user base, it was able to survive and evolve with the changing times, create a visual identity that is simple yet iconic in its own way, and utilise Scotland's own iconography to do so. Maintaining the saltire throughout its life, I really think was a good move in the long run. It helped give Grampian its identity, and helped it serve those dedicated viewers who tuned in across nearly 5 decades. And so that brings us to the end of another episode of the Ident Review Extra. If you enjoyed this look back at Grampian, then please leave a like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for lots more Ident related content. I've been Martyn from AMTV, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Well, that does bring us to the end of another day here on AMTV. We do hope you enjoyed the programme, and a special thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and to everyone who's tuned in. Until the next broadcast, we wish you a good night.